James Thornton sits alone in a coffee shop on Music Row watching his phone. It's 7 in the morning in Nashville, which means the commercial is launching across Europe right now. 23 countries, 47 television networks, streaming platforms on 3 continents. He takes a sip of black coffee and smiles. The brand spent $18 million on this campaign. $18 million. And somewhere in that polished, focus-grouped 30-second masterpiece buried between the product shots and the celebrity voiceover is a 5-second musical hook that belongs to him, a hook they never paid for, a hook they thought he'd never notice. In 6 hours, when the New York office is open, James will send an email that will cost them everything. But to understand how a fired jingle writer brought a multi-billion-dollar music label to its knees, you have to go back 9 months. The email arrived on a Tuesday. Subject line: restructuring. James knew what that meant before he opened it. The music industry doesn't fire people anymore. It restructures, it pivots, it realigns its creative vision. The email was 3 paragraphs long and said nothing. Corporate speak, empty calories, the kind of language designed to avoid lawsuits. His manager, a woman named Diane who wore black turtlenecks year-round and spoke exclusively in marketing jargon, called him 20 minutes later. "It's not personal, James," she said. "We're moving toward a more collaborative model. We need creators who are team players." James had been with Archer Sound Group for 12 years. He'd written hooks for car commercials, fast food jingles, pharmaceutical ads. The kind of music no one remembers but everyone hears. 5 seconds of melody designed to lodge in your brain like a splinter. He was good at it. Too good, probably. Good enough that he didn't need a team. The severance package was generous. 2 months' salary. Health insurance through the end of the quarter. A non-compete clause that prevented him from working with any of Archer's clients for 18 months. Standard. James signed it without reading the fine print. He knew what it said. He'd written enough contracts to recognize the shape of a cage. But there was one document he didn't sign, one agreement they forgot to ask for. The writer's share. In the music industry, there are 2 kinds of rights. The master recording, which belongs to whoever pays for the studio time, and the composition, which belongs to the person who wrote the melody. Archer owned the masters. They owned the recordings. But James owned the songs. Every note, every chord progression, every 5-second earworm he'd ever scratched out on a napkin. It was standard practice. Labels rarely bothered to buy out writers' shares for commercial work. It wasn't worth the paperwork. Jingles weren't supposed to have a long shelf life. They were disposable, forgettable, except when they weren't. 3 months after the firing, James heard his hook in a Lexus commercial. Not a new hook, an old one, something he'd written 4 years ago for a campaign that never aired. The project had been shelved. The client changed direction. James forgot about it. But Archer didn't. They kept the recording, and now it was back. 17 seconds of it, looped over slow-motion shots of sedans driving through autumnal forests. James was sitting in a sports bar when he heard it. The television was muted, but he didn't need sound. He recognized the melody in the shape of the edits, the way the strings swelled at the 12-second mark, the little piano flourish at the end. His piano flourish. He took out his phone and searched for the ad, found it on YouTube, watched it twice. The comments were full of people asking about the music. "What's this song called? Anyone know the artist?" No one knew. It was anonymous, corporate, perfect. James went home and opened his files. He kept meticulous records, every contract, every work-for-hire agreement, every sync license. It was a habit he'd developed early in his career, back when a publishing company tried to claim ownership of a song he'd written in college. He'd learned then that the music industry runs on paper. Whoever has the receipts wins. He found the file, The original session notes from the Lexus project, the contract with Archer, the email chain where they'd requested revisions. And there it was, the clause. Archer Sound Group retains all rights to master recordings produced during the term of this agreement. Writer retains compositional rights and agrees to standard ASCAP royalty distribution. Standard language. Boilerplate. The kind of sentence no one reads because it's always there. James read it 7 times. He opened a new browser window and searched for the Lexus campaign. It wasn't just one commercial, it was a series. 4 different spots, all using variations of the same musical theme. His theme. He checked the credits. Music by Archer Sound Group. No mention of his name. He pulled up his ASCAP account, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, the organization that tracks public performances of music and distributes royalties. He logged in and searched for his work ID number. Found the song. It was registered under his name, composition by James Thornton, but the performance royalties were set to 0. No airings reported, no payments issued, which meant either the commercial hadn't been filed correctly or someone at Archer had decided not to file it at all. James leaned back in his chair. He could feel the shape of it now. The oversight, the assumption. Archer had fired him and assumed he'd move on. Assumed he'd be too busy scrambling for freelance work to notice a 4-year-old jingle resurfacing in a car commercial. And maybe they were right. Most people would have missed it. But James wasn't most people. He'd spent 12 years writing music that disappeared into the background. Music designed to be invisible. He knew how the system worked. He knew where the cracks were. And now, he was looking at one. A crack wide enough to drive a Lexus through. He spent the next 2 weeks researching, not just his contract, but the campaign itself. The Lexus spots were running nationally, prime time, Sunday football, late-night talk shows. He estimated the media buy at somewhere north of $5 million. And that was just the United States. He found versions of the ad in Canada, in Australia, the same music, the same 17 seconds, his 17 seconds. He calculated the performance royalties. At standard ASCAP rates, he was owed approximately 43 cents every time the commercial aired, which didn't sound like much until you multiplied it by the number of airings. Conservatively, the ad had run 8,000 times in 3 months. That was $3,400. Not life-changing money. But it was his money, and Archer hadn't paid him a cent. James could have sent an invoice, could have called Diane and asked for the royalties. It would have been the professional thing to do. The normal thing. But James wasn't interested in normal. He was interested in leverage. He opened a new document and started writing. Not a demand letter. Not yet. First, he needed to understand the full scope. He searched for Archer's upcoming projects, found a press release dated 2 weeks ago. Archer Sound Group had been contracted to score a global campaign for a tech company, a smartphone launch. The press release was light on details, but it mentioned a partnership with a major advertising agency and hinted at a significant media spend. James filed that information away and kept digging. A week later, the new campaign launched. Not the car commercial, something bigger. A 60-second spot for a phone called the Helix. The ad was everywhere: YouTube, Instagram, billboards. It opened with a wide shot of a city at dawn and a voiceover talking about connection. And underneath it all, barely audible but unmistakable, was a 5-second musical phrase. A rising arpeggio. 3 notes played on a synthesizer. James recognized it immediately. He'd written it 6 years ago for a campaign that never launched, a telecom pitch that got killed in the concept phase. Archer had shelved it, and now it was back, looped, processed, buried in the mix. But there, There. He watched the ad 4 times, took notes, checked the metadata. The music was credited to Archer Sound Group and a composer he'd never heard of. A name that didn't appear in any of Archer's promotional materials. A ghost, or more likely a front. Someone who'd agreed to let Archer credit them for work they didn't do. It happened all the time in the industry. Clients wanted names on paper, labels provided names. No one asked questions. James pulled up the contracts from that telecom pitch, found his original session files, compared the waveforms. It was a perfect match, note for note. They hadn't even bothered to re-record it. They'd just taken the master, run it through some plugins, and called it new. He opened his ASCAP account again, searched for the registration. It was there, under his name. But just like the Lexus campaign, no performance royalties had been filed. Archer was using his music, crediting someone else and paying him nothing. It was theft, clean and simple. But it was also a gift, because the Helix campaign wasn't regional, it was global. The press materials claimed it would run in 86 countries. The media buy was estimated at over $50 million, and somewhere in that budget was a line item for music licensing. Money that should have gone to James. Money that Archer had pocketed by pretending he didn't exist. James sat in his apartment and did the math. At standard sync licensing rates, a 5-second hook in a global campaign would typically cost between $50,000 and $200,000. Depending on usage, depending on territory, depending on how badly the client needed it. And that was just the upfront fee. Performance royalties would add another layer. Every time the ad aired, he was owed a fraction of a cent. But when you multiplied that fraction by millions of airings across 86 countries, it added up. Conservatively, he estimated his total claim at somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000. Maybe more. But James wasn't interested in estimates. He was interested in reality. And the reality was that Archer had bet their entire campaign on a piece of music they didn't own. A piece of music that could be taken away with a single legal filing. He waited. That was the key. Patience. The campaign needed to launch. It needed to saturate the market. Billboards needed to go up. Commercials needed to air. The client needed to invest everything. Because once they did, once the Helix phone was associated with that 5-second musical phrase in the minds of millions of consumers, Archer couldn't change it. Rebranding a global campaign mid-flight would cost tens of millions, maybe more. It would mean pulling ads, reshooting, re-editing, renegotiating with broadcasters. It would be a disaster. And James was going to give them a choice. Pay him what he was owed, plus damages, plus a penalty for the theft, or watch their campaign collapse in real time. 6 weeks after the campaign launched, James filed a DMCA takedown notice. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act, a federal law designed to protect intellectual property in the digital age. It was simple, elegant, brutally effective. He identified the infringing content, provided proof of ownership, and submitted the claim to YouTube, Instagram, and every major streaming platform where the ad appeared. The platforms had 72 hours to respond. They could either take down the content or forward the claim to Archer and let them dispute it. Either way, the clock was ticking. James sent a second email directly to Archer's legal department. Subject line: Copyright infringement notice, Helix campaign. The email was 2 pages long. It included timestamps, waveform comparisons, copies of his original contracts, a detailed breakdown of every instance where his music had been used without permission, and at the bottom, a number: $750,000. That was his settlement offer, non-negotiable, payable within 14 days. Or he'd escalate to federal court. The response came in 4 hours, not from Diane, from someone higher, a vice president named Marcus. The email was brief, professional, terrified. "We'd like to discuss this matter at your earliest convenience." They scheduled a call for the next morning. James didn't prepare. He didn't need to. He already knew what they'd say. They'd claim it was an oversight, a miscommunication. They'd offer him $50,000 and hope he'd take it. And when he said no, they'd try to scare him, threaten him with legal fees, remind him that he couldn't afford to fight them. But James had done his homework. He knew the math. A federal copyright lawsuit would cost Archer at least $1 million in legal fees. Even if they won, which they wouldn't, the publicity would be devastating. A multi-billion-dollar label stealing from a fired employee. The optics were poison. They'd settle. They had to. The call lasted 17 minutes. Marcus did most of the talking. He was apologetic, conciliatory. He blamed the oversight on a database error, said that Archer had always intended to compensate James fairly. James let him talk, let him spin. And when Marcus finally asked what it would take to resolve the matter quietly, James repeated the number. $750,000. Marcus went silent. Then he tried to negotiate. Suggested $200,000. James said no. Suggested $400,000. James said no. The number was $750,000. Take it or he'd see them in court. Marcus asked for 24 hours. James gave him 12. The settlement agreement arrived the next morning. $750,000. Paid in 2 installments. The first within 72 hours. The second within 30 days. In exchange, James would grant Archer a retroactive license for all previous and current uses of his compositions. He'd sign an NDA. He'd agree not to discuss the terms. Standard. James read the contract 3 times, had a lawyer friend review it, signed it. The first payment hit his account 2 days later. $375,000. Minus taxes, it was enough to pay off his student loans, buy a new car, maybe put a down payment on a house. The second payment came 4 weeks later. James deposited it and didn't look back. He never returned to Archer Sound Group, never wrote another jingle. He took the money and started a publishing company. A small operation, just him and a part-time accountant. He signed young composers, taught them how to read contracts, how to protect their work, how to recognize when someone was trying to steal from them. Because the industry runs on theft, on the assumption that creative people are too desperate or too naive to fight back. But James had learned the truth. The system has rules, and if you know the rules better than the people trying to break them, you win. Every time. On a cold morning in December, almost a year after the settlement, James saw the Helix ad on television. It was still running, still using his 5-second hook. But now, buried in the fine print at the end of the commercial, was a credit. Music by James Thornton. 7 words, barely visible. But there. He smiled, took a sip of coffee and changed the channel. The fight was over. He'd won. Not because he was louder or meaner or more connected, but because he'd read the contract. Because he'd kept the receipts. Because he'd understood that in the music industry, like in every industry, power doesn't come from talent. It comes from knowing exactly what you're owed and making damn sure you collect.
If you enjoyed watching the system crumble, leave a like, subscribe, and share your own office war stories in the comments below. Welcome to Executive Fallout.